Chapter 1. A Silent Cry in the Dark. The stars in the farthest reaches of the galaxy were cold, indifferent witnesses to the events that had transpired. Space, vast and endless, seemed to swallow all things with its unyielding silence. Orbiting an ancient, forgotten planet was a station that once buzzed with life, teeming with traders, explorers, and scientists, each with their own ambitions and dreams. Now, however, it hung in the dark, suspended in time, a relic of a bygone age. The station's once bright lights flickered intermittently, its power reserves stretching thin as the final remnants of its purpose quietly flickered away. The hum of its cooling systems and the faint whir of distant machinery were the only sounds that remained, like the breath of a dying animal, struggling for life as it grew weaker with each passing moment. But the most haunting thing of all was the emptiness, the silence that pervaded every corner of the station, echoing through its rusted halls and hollow rooms, devoid of any warmth or hope. It had been abandoned for years, left to drift aimlessly in the cold embrace of space, and with each day that passed, it seemed more like a ghost than a place once filled with purpose. The station was a memory, a faded image in the minds of those who had once lived and worked there, forgotten by the galaxy it had once served. Inside one of the deepest, least explored chambers of the station, the quiet sobs of a young girl echoed off the walls. Her small form, barely visible in the dim light of her surroundings, sat curled up in the corner of a dusty room. She was an alien, unlike anything seen in the galaxy before. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, her large, violet eyes reflecting the faintest glimmer of the dim lights above. Her thin, elongated limbs trembled slightly as she hugged her knees to her chest, the once brilliant patterns that adorned her body now dull and faded. She had been abandoned here, left alone in this decaying station by those she had trusted, those who had promised to protect her. But they had lied. They had left her to die, alone in the shadows of a forgotten world. The pain of abandonment was not just physical for her. It ran deep, twisting into her soul, a constant ache that gnawed at her with every passing minute. Her heart broke with every whispered cry, every memory of her home that flickered in her mind like a dying star. She had been betrayed by those she had once called family. Her name was Ilera, and she had once been a part of a thriving colony of her people, an ancient race of explorers and scientists who had mastered the art of travel across the stars long before humanity had even learned to dream of such things. They had built vast civilizations, colonies on distant worlds, and had once ruled over their corner of the galaxy with wisdom and grace. But that was before the war, before everything had fallen apart. Her people had been forced to flee their homeworld when a powerful enemy had come and destroyed it, leaving their civilization in ruins. The last of her kind had scattered across the galaxy, seeking refuge wherever they could find it. Ilera had been one of the fortunate ones, a child among the survivors, and she had been taken in by a family on this forgotten station. They had promised to keep her safe, to raise her as one of their own, but in the end, they had abandoned her when the colony's resources had run dry. They had left her to die alone in the dark, not even bothering to look back. Now, with the station on the verge of collapse, Ilera sat in the dark corner of the room, clutching the tattered remnants of a blanket that had once been a symbol of comfort. The bitter cold of space seeped through the cracks in the walls, and the air in the room was thin, almost suffocating. But it was the loneliness that weighed on her most, the unbearable silence, the fact that there was no one left to care. Her only companions were the flickering lights, the steady hum of the station's life support systems, and the memories of a life that had once been filled with laughter and warmth. The tears that flowed freely from her eyes were a testament to the anguish she felt, the grief of losing everything she had ever known. She had lost her family, her home, her people, and now she was losing herself. And yet, despite the crushing weight of her despair, there was something inside her that refused to surrender completely. It was a small flame, flickering faintly within her chest, urging her to hold on, to survive. Perhaps it was the remnants of her people's strength, the deep-seated will to survive that had been passed down through generations. Or perhaps it was something else, a spark of hope that, no matter how dim, would never fade completely. That was when the sound came. At first, it was faint, a soft hum barely perceptible over the noises of the station. But as the seconds ticked by, the sound grew louder, clearer. A ship was approaching the station. Ilara froze, her tear-streaked face turning toward the doorway. She strained to hear, her senses alert, her heart beating faster as she tried to process the reality of what she was hearing. Was it a rescue mission? Had someone come for her? Could it be? Could it be human? Her heart beat faster. The possibility seemed unlikely. Humans had never been this far out in the galaxy. They were still young in the grand scheme of spacefaring civilizations, their reach limited to the nearer sectors of the galaxy. But still, the sound of the ship's engines was unmistakable. It was coming closer, and if Ilara had any hope left in her, this was the moment to hold on to it. Maybe this was the miracle she had been waiting for. With trembling hands, Ilara stood up, her legs weak from days of sitting in the same position. She stumbled towards the door, her movements slow, deliberate. She had to see. She had to know. The pain in her chest was suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the fear of remaining alone. She pressed her palm against the cold metal door, and the latch clicked open, revealing the vast, empty corridor beyond. Her heart raced as she stepped into the hallway, her senses overwhelmed by the unfamiliar noise. She followed the sound of the approaching ship, her pulse quickening with each step. She had no idea what to expect, but the thought of seeing another living being, of being seen, was too powerful to resist. As she rounded the corner, her eyes widened in shock. The ship, a small freighter, hovered outside the docking bay, its engines gently purring. The hatch of the ship slowly opened, and a figure stepped out. At first, Ilara couldn't see much, just a silhouette against the bright light spilling from the doorway. But as the figure stepped closer, she could see that it was a human. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a rugged face and deep, kind eyes. His uniform was worn, practical, and marked with the insignia of a long-forgotten fleet. He had come for her. And then, to her surprise, he didn't approach her with suspicion or fear. He didn't step back when he saw her alien form. Instead, he simply walked toward her, his expression filled with empathy. As he came closer, Ilara couldn't help herself. She stepped forward, a sob escaping her lips as she fell into his arms, the last of her strength giving way to the overwhelming need to be held, to be comforted. The man's arms were warm, strong, and steady, and as he wrapped them around her, she felt the weight of years of loneliness and abandonment fall away. The tears came again, but they weren't tears of despair. These were tears of relief, of gratitude. She wasn't alone anymore. The human's arms were warm around her, a stark contrast to the cold, empty silence she had endured for so long. Ilara had forgotten what it felt like to be held, to feel the presence of another living being, to have someone who cared. The man, this stranger who had come from the stars, was the first person to show her kindness in what felt like a lifetime. And it was overwhelming. The floodgates that she had closed off in her heart opened as the tears streamed down her face, her body trembling with a mix of relief, disbelief, and raw emotion. She wasn't abandoned anymore. Someone had found her. The man held her tightly, his hands gentle but firm, as if he understood that she needed the comfort more than anything else in the world. He didn't speak at first, just offering her the quiet reassurance that she desperately needed. In that moment, Ilara realized that she had no idea who this human was or why he had come to this forsaken place, but it didn't matter. He was here now, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't have to face the darkness alone. After a few long moments, when the sobs finally slowed, the man gently pulled away, though his hands still rested on her shoulders. He studied her with kind, but cautious eyes. His voice was deep, yet soothing, and it held a sense of concern that made Ilara feel safe, even in the midst of everything that had happened. "You're safe now," he said softly, his accent heavy but clear. "I'm here to help you." Ilara wiped her eyes, trying to regain control, but she still trembled as she looked up at him. She had never encountered a human before. No one from Earth had ever made it this far into the galaxy. She had heard tales, stories of the brave explorers and colonists, but none of them had ventured beyond their familiar space lanes. Earth was so far away, so isolated from the rest of the universe. She had never expected to see a human, let alone have one rescue her from the wreckage of her lonely existence. She started to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She had forgotten how to talk to others, how to engage with a world outside of her isolation. "I was alone," she finally managed to say. "I thought no one would come." The man nodded, as if he understood. "I know. That's why I'm here." His gaze softened, and his tone turned more reassuring. I'm not going to leave you. Ilara's heart swelled at his words, though doubt lingered in the back of her mind. He was here now, but would he stay? The station was a ghost ship, a graveyard of forgotten technology, drifting alone in the endless expanse of space. There was nothing here, no civilization, no allies, just the remnants of a once thriving outpost, now a hollow shell. What had brought him here? Was this some kind of rescue mission, or was he just passing through? The man must have sensed her uncertainty, because he quickly spoke again, as if reading her mind. I'm not here to leave you behind, I promise. I've been searching for this station. I was sent here on a mission. Ilara stared at him, processing his words slowly. He had been searching for this place? For her? The disbelief inside her grew, and for a moment, she couldn't understand what it all meant. She was nothing but an abandoned, forgotten child of a lost civilization, and yet here he was, this human, standing in front of her with compassion in his eyes, like he had been waiting for this very moment. Her voice cracked slightly as she asked, "You came for me?" The human paused, his expression unreadable for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I was sent to find survivors of your kind. There were rumors about a species that had disappeared, about their knowledge. I didn't know where I would find you, but I knew I had to try." His eyes softened, and there was a hint of something regret, perhaps, or sorrow as he continued. "I didn't know how long you'd been here, but when I saw the distress beacon, I knew I had to follow it. I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner." Ilara felt her heart tighten in her chest as the weight of his words sank in. He had been searching for her people, for her, and yet she had been trapped in this station for so long, forgotten by everyone. How had it all come to this? Why had her people been abandoned? The hurt she had felt for so long, the isolation, the betrayal, came rushing back in waves, nearly knocking her off balance. But the man's presence was a grounding force, a reminder that someone cared, that someone had come to find her. Her tears started to well up again, but this time, they were different. They weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude, tears of relief, that after all this time, after all the pain she had endured, someone was finally here to help. "I thought I would die here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought my people were gone forever." The human took a step closer, his hand reaching out in a gesture of kindness. "You're not alone anymore," he said gently. "You're safe. I promise you." Ilara looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that this moment, this encounter was real, and not just some cruel trick of fate. But the fear that had grown inside her over the years, the fear of being abandoned once again, made it hard to fully embrace this new possibility. What if he was just another false hope? What if, like everyone before him, he would leave once the mission was done? The human must have sensed her hesitation, because he held her gaze with an intensity that was almost tangible. "I know you've been through a lot," he said softly, "and I can't promise you that everything will be easy. But I will stay with you. I will help you. Together, we can rebuild what's been lost. You're not forgotten anymore." His words, though simple, pierced through the walls she had built around herself. For the first time in years, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel: hope. It was fragile, barely a whisper in her chest, but it was there. And it was enough to make her believe that, maybe, just maybe, she could have a future again. A future that wasn't defined by loneliness and abandonment. A future where she didn't have to face the darkness alone. Chapter 2, A New Beginning. Ilara sat down on the cold, metal floor of the abandoned station, the quiet hum of the dimming machinery around them creating an eerie backdrop to the sudden change in her life. The human, whose presence was both a relief and a mystery, knelt down before her, his expression softening further as he looked at her with genuine care. His voice was steady, but it carried a note of reassurance that felt both foreign and comforting to her. "Listen, I know this is all overwhelming," he said, "but I'm here to help. You don't have to face this alone anymore." His words felt like a balm to her battered soul, soothing the raw pain of years spent in isolation. It was difficult for Ilara to fathom the sudden shift from loneliness to the possibility of connection, and the overwhelming emotions that surged within her were almost too much to process at once. For so long, Ilara had believed that her people were gone, her species had been lost in the wake of their destruction, scattered to the farthest corners of the galaxy. She had been one of the last, a child taken in by those who promised to care for her, only to leave her abandoned when their resources had run dry. Her memories of home, of her people, felt like distant dreams now. In this forsaken station, Ilera had come to accept that she was alone, truly alone in the universe. But now, there was this human, this man who had come to her in the dead of night, in the forgotten corners of space, to give her a chance at life again. She had never expected this. A part of her still wanted to retreat into the safety of her isolation, to run from the reality that was unfolding before her. She had been hurt too many times before, and the fear of being abandoned once again made her hesitant to trust. But there was something in the man's eyes, something unwavering in his gaze that made her believe. His voice was filled with warmth, not the coldness of a stranger, but the gentleness of someone who understood her pain. "You're not just a survivor, Ilera," he said, his words punctuated by the sincerity in his tone. "You have a future, and I'm going to help you find it." The more he spoke, the more Ilera felt the walls around her begin to crumble. The years of grief, of being forgotten, of feeling like she had no place in the universe, began to dissolve under the kindness of this human. He wasn't just here to take her away from the station. He was offering her a new life, one filled with possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But it wasn't that simple. How could she? How could anyone? "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to start over. I don't know what's left for me." The human reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, and for a moment, Ilera felt the weight of his compassion in the simple gesture. "You don't have to do this alone, Ilera," he said. "You can start with small steps. You can take one moment at a time, and together, we'll figure it out." Ilera closed her eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and hesitation. The future was an unknown landscape, one she had never dared to approach before. She had spent years buried in the past, haunted by memories of what was lost, but now, there was a faint, flickering light at the edge of the darkness, a hope that she had never believed possible. And it was enough to push her to look forward, to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a place for her in this vast, uncharted galaxy. "Okay," she said softly, looking up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. I'll try to trust you." He smiled, and for the first time since their encounter, she saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. "That's all I can ask for," he said, his voice filled with quiet assurance. Chapter 3. A Journey Toward the Unknown. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. Ilera had spent the majority of her life either in the station or in the quiet corners of the galaxy, hidden away from the broader universe. But now, with the human by her side, everything was different. They moved through the derelict station, gathering what little was left that could be salvaged. The station, once an imposing monument to technology, was now a tomb of forgotten promises and wasted potential. Its walls were covered in dust, its systems failing one by one. But to Ilera, the station represented the last of what she had known, her memories of a life lost in time, buried beneath the weight of isolation. And though it had been her home for so long, she could no longer stay. The human whose name was Marcus worked tirelessly to get them both ready for the journey. He had brought supplies with him, resources that were enough to last them for a while. As they prepared to leave, Ilera felt a pang of sadness at the thought of abandoning the station, but she knew that this was not her home anymore. Her home, the place where she belonged, was somewhere out there among the stars, among those who could accept her for who she was. Together, they made their way to the ship Marcus had arrived in, a small but sturdy vessel that had been designed for long-range travel. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get them off the station and into the vast expanse of space. As they boarded the ship and the engines hummed to life, Ilera's heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. For the first time in her life, she was leaving behind everything she had ever known. The ship's departure from the station felt like a rebirth. As they drifted away from the dying station, Ilera looked out the small viewport, her eyes scanning the endless void of space. The stars glimmered in the distance, each one a tiny beacon of possibility. She wasn't sure where they were going, but for the first time in a long while, she felt something stir inside her, a sense of hope. Marcus, noticing her gaze, turned to her and smiled. "I know it's overwhelming, but this is a new beginning. You don't have to worry about what's behind you anymore. The future is out there." Ilera nodded, the quiet confidence in his voice reassuring her. She was ready for this. She didn't know what the future held, but with Marcus by her side, she knew that she could face it. The unknown was vast, but it no longer seemed so frightening. "Where do we go from here?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his fingers gliding over the controls. "Wherever you want to go, Ilera," he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "The galaxy is vast, and there are worlds we haven't even begun to explore. But one thing is certain, we'll find a place for you. You won't be alone anymore, and I'll be right here with you." Ilera's heart swelled as she took in his words. He was offering her a future one filled with possibilities. But most importantly, he was offering her something she had never thought she'd have again, a home. And so, as the ship flew into the unknown, Ilera felt the weight of the past slowly lifting. She wasn't alone anymore. There was a whole universe waiting for her, and for the first time in her life, she was ready to face it. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but with Marcus by her side, she knew she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and that was all she ever needed. As the ship sailed further into the void, Ilera could feel the weight of her emotions shifting from one moment to the next. She was finally free from the ghost of her past, from the remnants of her abandoned life. Every passing star, every new stretch of space, was a reminder that she was no longer confined to the forgotten station, the desolate corner of the galaxy that had been her prison for so long. The stars outside the viewport seemed like tiny pinpricks of hope, endless and full of promise. And yet, there was a lingering doubt, a quiet, unspoken fear that hovered just beyond her grasp. Could this really be a new beginning? Could the future truly be something more than just survival? Marcus, sensing her hesitations, turned to her with a calm expression. He hadn't yet pressed her for details about her past, and he wouldn't not yet. He understood the gravity of what she had experienced, and he respected the silence she held. But he could see the questions in her eyes, the weight of her uncertainty. He had spent his life studying the stars, exploring the unknown, but the moment he had met Ilera, everything had changed. He hadn't known what to expect, but he had known one thing for certain. He could not let her face the galaxy alone. She deserved a chance, a future that was her own, and he was determined to give it to her. "We're headed toward a small colony on Cyrenes, an outpost just outside the known space routes," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "It's not much, but it's a place where you can start fresh. I know it's not home, but it'll be a place where you can take your first step toward figuring out who you are, away from the ghosts of the past." Ilera turned to him, her violet eyes searching his face. She had never had a place of her own, never had a home that she could call hers. The idea of starting over, of finding a place to belong, was both terrifying and exhilarating. She didn't know what it would be like, what Cyrenes would offer, but she was willing to trust Marcus. She had to. He was the first person to show her any form of kindness, the first to give her hope in a future that had seemed so far out of reach. "I'll follow you," she said, her voice steady, though it quivered slightly with the weight of the uncertainty she still felt. "I'll try, but I don't know how to belong. I don't know how to live again." "You don't have to know everything right now," Marcus replied gently. "You just have to take it one step at a time, and we'll figure it out together. I won't leave you. You're not alone." His words lingered in the air between them, and for the first time since they had met, Ilera felt the quiet stirrings of something familiar, something forgotten. A sense of hope. Hope that she could find a way forward, a way to rebuild herself. The past didn't define her. The future did. And for the first time, Ilera was ready to take that first step toward it. As the ship continued its journey, the vast expanse of space stretched out before them. Every star they passed seemed like a promise, a possibility, a potential new life waiting to be discovered. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to make. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that she could write, one that she could shape. Chapter 4. New Horizons. Days turned into weeks as they traveled through space, and the void seemed less intimidating with each passing day. The hum of the ship's engines became a steady rhythm in the background, like a heartbeat, grounding Ilera in the present. She spent her time learning the ins and outs of the ship, working alongside Marcus as he showed her the various systems and tools that kept their vessel running smoothly. In those quiet moments, with only the stars as their witnesses, something profound began to form between them. It wasn't just the bond of a rescuer and the rescued, it was the bond of two souls, finding solace in each other's company in a universe that had once felt indifferent to both of them. The more Ilera learned about Marcus, the more she came to admire his resilience. He had been on his own for a long time, traveling the stars without a home, without anyone to call family. His journey had been a solitary one, much like hers. But the difference between them was clear. Marcus had chosen his path. Ilera, on the other hand, had been forced onto hers, pulled from one disaster to the next, trying to survive in a galaxy that had turned its back on her. But now, as they drifted closer to Cyrenes, Ilera felt that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could start to rebuild. The colony on Cyrenes was small, but bustling. It was a trading post, a place for travelers and explorers to rest and resupply, a haven for those who were looking for a place to get away from the demands of the larger galactic factions. It wasn't much, but it was a fresh start, a place where Ilera could begin to find herself again. As they approached the station, Ilera looked out the viewport at the vibrant lights of Cyrenes, the steady stream of ships coming and going. It felt like a world apart from the cold station she had left behind. The air here was different, it was alive with possibility. And for the first time in a long time, Ilera allowed herself to believe that maybe this was where she could belong. The moment their ship docked, Marcus turned to her, offering a warm smile. "This is it. This is where you start your new life, Ilera. Whatever you need, I'll help you get it. You're free now." Ilera's heart swelled with emotion as she stepped off the ship, her feet touching solid ground once again. The bustling streets of Cyrenes were alive with energy humans, aliens, and travelers from every corner of the galaxy, all moving with purpose. It was a far cry from the cold, silent station where she had spent so many years. For the first time, Ilera felt like she could breathe. She was free. "I don't know what to do," Ilera confessed, her voice hesitant but hopeful. "I've never had a place to call home. I don't know how to start." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've already taken the hardest step, Ilera. You're here, and that's all that matters. Now, we'll figure the rest out together. One step at a time." They walked through the busy streets of Cyrenes, the unfamiliar sights and sounds swirling around them. It wasn't just a new world, it was a new beginning. The past was behind her, and with each step, Ilera could feel the weight of it lifting. The future stretched out before her, full of endless possibilities. For the first time, Ilera smiled. The weight of the loneliness, the despair, and the pain she had carried for so long began to fade. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a place in this galaxy, and she had a future to build, starting today. As they continued down the path, the unknowns of the galaxy no longer seemed so terrifying. The universe had opened up to her in a way she had never imagined, and she was ready to embrace it. The journey ahead would be long, but it was one she no longer had to face alone.